Hey, we're live. We're live. All right, very good. Hey, thanks everyone for coming out. I appreciate it. I'm going to figure out the ratio of RSVPs to people who show up. So, but I appreciate you coming, especially on a hot evening. And I appreciate Ken coming from Atlanta from New Relic. We'll talk about that here in just a second. These are the slides from the lunch, although they apply, so I'm going to go through a few of them. I do benefit from the partnership that I'm going to show you as far as this meeting space is concerned. So this meeting space is made available by these folks. So I appreciate that. Open Table and these folks. And there is, this meetup as well as several other meetups are under the umbrella of ChawDev, and so you can go there and you can see all those different meetups, which is cool. Ken was saying that, Atlanta could take an example from us as far as a coalition, as far as a culture we've created. You guys, this is one of the new guys who are, well, he's not new, but new to ChawDev Lunch, who's running the ChawDev Lunch and coming up with content and feeding 70 people a week. It's crazy how many people come to Isn't that? It's growing. It is. In fact, look at all these meetups. So this is what we've got going in Chattanooga around meetups. So, fantastic. And finally, get involved. A couple links for that as well. So let me introduce Ken. And while I'm doing that, this is going to automatically switch over to this. Isn't that nice? Ken is from New Relic. He's coming to us from Atlanta. It's Ken Ahrens, right? Like an Aaron, running an Aaron? Ahrens, yeah. Ahrens, very good. And he agreed to come and talk to us about New Relic because, it does kind of monitoring as well as other stuff. And of course, that's, DevOps. That's part of that, especially if you adhere to that, that CAMS acronym, measurement, that certainly falls into the space of DevOps and measurement. So with that, thank you, Ken.
All right, thanks, Richard. So I met with Richard a little bit before we came up here, and I said, I don't have that many slides. It's not going to be a huge amount of content. And he said, oh, but you're going to demo something, right? And I said, oh yeah, I absolutely can demo. I demo all day, every day. So I'm happy to give you guys a demo of New Relic, or point out any of the key capabilities of the product. I did have a couple of slides I wanted to go through. Okay. This is just a little theme, that we've been coming up with around all kinds of companies becoming software companies. Everyone's got a definition of DevOps. I'm not going to try to beat the dead horse there, but I'll pull together a couple of the things that we've been using, and then I'm primarily going to talk about where monitoring fits in from an overall DevOps standpoint. So you might be curious, why would you even, come and listen to me? What's my credibility and my background and that kind of thing? So I'll first admit I've primarily worked on the vendor side of things, and I've basically split my career, almost half my career on the monitoring side, and about half my career on the dev test side. So in the monitoring world, I've sold APM. That's what we have at New Relic, application monitoring, and also systems, network monitoring type of stuff. So people worry about things like real-time data, alerting, charting, reports, that type of thing. On the development side, I did a lot around testing, test-driven development, people who were trying to become agile, and especially if they needed environments, they didn't have all the non-prod environments. And this was before kind of the popularity of cloud sources that you have today. So this is kind of my background and where I'm coming from. I'm primarily a Java guy, but also getting familiar with JavaScript these days and Node.js and that kind of thing. So that's just a little bit about me. Oh, maybe I need to mute. It's fine. So one of the cool trends that's happening out there is the way that your customers are. I'm just going to mute. How do I mute my thing here?
You can hear it coming out of your speaker?
Yeah, it's fine. So one of the primary ways now that customers of businesses are interacting with them is through software. You buy things from a website. You don't drive to a store often anymore, right? If you're going and getting insurance, you want to look at your insurance on the web portal and see what you have and when it expires and that kind of thing, what the amounts are. Software is coming up in all kinds of places that we didn't even think of before. Software is incredibly common now in cars. Actually, down in Atlanta, one of the big projects that is being kind of one of the big companies pushing through the startup community is AT&T. And in Atlanta, they have what's called the AT&T Foundry, and they're pushing the connected car. In Atlanta, that's where they want to kind of create some startups around connected car initiatives. What's in it for AT&T? Well, they want to sell you service for your car, right? For more cell service for your car. But you know, so you're seeing nowadays that everywhere you go, all different types of companies and things that were old, stodgy kind of companies are now becoming software technology companies, right? You know, and everything from Uber to, you know, online e-commerce. You know, if you think just driving from Atlanta up here, I just popped it on my GPS on my phone. I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't really plan ahead of time. You know, I said, oh, it'll take me an hour and 43 minutes to get there, right? So I think that becomes important because when you think about this as a backdrop, your customers are going to actually, the risk that you run, there's these great benefits that software can bring. I can reach my customer more cheaply. The other thing is they can also leave you very quickly, and you can lose orders without even knowing what's happening. So having visibility into what's happening with your software and your application is really important, you know. So in the end, the software is here because the folks behind the business are trying to find a real easy way to reach the customer. Unfortunately, they've got to, you know, make their way through the developers and operations teams. They're all on the same page to some degree because they understand, hey, we need visibility into the application. We need to know what the application is doing. Well, another key thing that the business wants to understand is what's the customer doing? What's the customer experience? So I'm glad that you know the CPU and memory on the servers and that kind of thing, but is the customer, I hear from them that they're having a slow time, you know, accessing our website or that kind of thing. And really, the biggest area is getting valuable business metrics out of your software to understand things like conversion rates, what's working, A/B testing, stuff like that, so that you push your software that's now your primary interface with your business, you push it down the most profitable paths for your business. So when these teams are all working in their own silos and they don't collaborate with each other, that's where things really slow down, right? And that kind of gets us into, I think everyone's really familiar with this, and this is why I'm going through it real quickly, the traditional kind of waterfall approach at throwing stuff over the wall, you know, and waiting for the customer to complain to the business. That's not going to work anymore. So, you know, with a play off of the CAMS model at New Relic, we've been using the acronym CALM, where we just added lean in there, you know, because it is easy, especially around things like automation, to make them real complicated and bigger than they really need to be. But the big focus area that I'm going to talk about is around measurement. Okay, so sorry, I was just trying to, this is all the early level part, which I know everybody already knows, so I'm going through it quickly.
You made it look like we rehearsed that earlier, and of course we didn't. The site worked that good. So one of the key things is you've got to have collaboration. If this is an example of a system architecture, you've got users, they're coming in, accessing your application through mobile devices or through their desktop, browser, whatever. Maybe it's coming into your own infrastructure. Nowadays, if it's running in your own data center, you call it private cloud. You know, and reaching back into your systems, even if it's not cloud. But maybe you're dipping your toe into public cloud, you know, throwing some of the environment out on, you know, Azure. We were talking about that earlier, or Amazon. What starts to happen is it becomes very difficult to understand, you know, where is a transaction taking place and how do I know that it's running successfully? Okay, so just a couple of sort of the definitions of what we use in the monitoring world. Application monitoring is about APM,
that's about looking in where your code base is on the back-end systems. Okay, so the servers that you control, or at least the ones that you're paying for the hosting for, that's APM. A lot of people think about things like server monitoring, CPU, memory, disk I/O, and that type of thing. So those two are, they work together. APM will tell you what the transactions are doing across the servers, and the servers will tell you about the server health. So you really need to be thinking about doing both of those. So we group that whole group together and call it application performance. And then over on the left-hand side, you want to have some visibility into the end-user experience. Okay, so nowadays, the modern browsers, Chrome, Google did a good job driving innovation into the browser market, and all the browsers have stepped up their game. They actually have APIs now that you can tap into and find out how long is it taking for the page to load. Okay, so there's a set of browser monitoring capabilities that'll tell you what's happening with the real user experience. Similarly, if you have native mobile apps, that's another kind of black hole. Do you know what the experience is on the mobile device? So there's monitoring for those as well. And then a lot of people are familiar with synthetics, which is where you send test transactions into the environment. Okay, so synthetics are not really a good analogy of what real customer experience is, because it's just more like running a test transaction in production. You're going to not do something dangerous like complete an order, or delete a record or something like that. So synthetics are good to help you get a baseline of what's going on, over a long period of time, and they'll help you know if your site is down in the middle of the night or something like that. But it's that browser end user experience monitoring. That's how you can really tell what what the end users are seeing. So just another way of kind of looking at this data, again, when it comes to operations teams and the traditional kind of languages that they've been speaking, historically they talked in servers and networks language, right? And so, when you say, hey, I need environments and is the system running and this kind of thing, you would have a monitor maybe that would tell you, hey, the server is still up, it's still connected to the network, so I guess everything is still running. And at some point, people realized most of the interesting things that servers are doing is running applications, so we need to monitor those apps themselves. And that was where kind of that next language went up, where we said, hey, maybe the server's on, but actually Java crashed, or some other catastrophic thing happened on the server, but the server's working, but the app's not, and we want to know what's going on with the app. That next level is where you actually are mapping that back to the user experience, okay? Because it doesn't matter if we have low CPU, low memory, and we're saving money on our Amazon bill if the response time for the user is 20 seconds, right? So that was where on my earlier diagram I was trying to show where you got to map it on both sides. And then finally, kind of the frontier where a lot of companies are moving to is figuring out how to take that same data we already have that we're collecting about the end user experience and help us drive, what do we want to do with our product next? What are we going to do with our next release? So the most common place where dev and ops comes together is around releases and frequent releases. And from a monitoring perspective, the thing that you want to try to understand is this release that we just had any better or worse than the previous one? Okay, so if you're using some kind of automation to push your releases into production, like continuous delivery, then you want to send a notification to your monitoring tool to say, hey, here's a new version starting right now. Track this as a new release. So tell me if the memory, the CPU, the response time, or the throughput of the application has changed. Because when things start to go south and people get alerted, the first question that they're going to ask is, what's changed? And when you can go in and say, hey, wait a second, we just did a release, you know, and we seem to be having issues in here, now we can go and roll back real quickly because we have that visibility that hey, nobody realized it, but it was caused by that latest code release. So this is probably one of the big areas that we see at New Relic where developers and operation teams collaborate because you know, everyone's singing off the same sheet of music here. You know, we know that the name of the release, when it went out, and even the release notes and that kind of thing are there and available. So I think I'm going to actually stop here. I had a couple other slides, but I think it might make more sense to jump in and show you guys the product, what it looks like, and then see if you guys have any questions.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions so far, or comments, criticisms?
So far, so good? Cool.
Okay, so is it still sharing? So this is our New Relic user interface. You'll see I'm running it in Chrome. Everything's web-based. There's actually a mobile app for it. My phone's over there. But so there's a mobile app so that you can get an alert or see the response time of your site or the health of your servers on your mobile device when you're not sitting at your desk, right? Up across the top here, you see the different product groups from New Relic that we have. You know, frankly, I think when it comes to DevOps, some kind of monitoring. You need any type of monitoring, you know, for starters. There are open source monitoring tools, especially that are good around infrastructure monitoring, like Nagios and Zabbix are probably the two most popular ones that I've heard of. They'll give you visibility into your servers and networks and that type of thing. When it comes to application performance, there's not too many open source options yet, but at least having something that'll tell you what's going on with the site is good. So here on the main overview screen, this is actually monitoring our documentation site. I heard a couple of you guys talking earlier about WordPress versus Drupal. This actually is a Drupal site, so it's our docs.newrelic.com. In the last 30 minutes, the response time of our Drupal code is 240 milliseconds. We can look at bigger chunks of time if we want. I'm actually going to just put 3 days up there because I know we did some deployments in the last couple of days. Even though the response time of the app server is, pretty fast, 200 millisecond range, the browser end user experience was measured at 4 seconds. We actually see somewhere around a 10 to 1, 9 to 1 ratio is common. This is actually a little especially bad, but and that's important to realize because a lot of people will spend huge amounts of time tuning their code, and the end users don't experience it or feel the difference. Okay, so
what attributes to the big gap?
Yeah, we'll take a look at that in a minute, but the first thing that you want to understand is if you have a gap or not, and then you want to try to figure out where it's coming from. Yep. So we'll look at that in a second. The other things that you expect to see is just a throughput. Normally you see kind of a up-down curve at nighttime. Our documentation site, for what it's worth, we have international users, so there's kind of always people that are on the site. We never really get it down to nothing. If there's uncaught errors that are happening in the system, that's an important issue that you want to track. Luckily for us, we're not having any errors right now. And then what are the top transactions that are happening on the site? So since it's a Drupal site, the most common transaction is someone viewing a page, viewing an article, and that's what this node page view is. Okay, and what this number 48% is telling me is that in the last 3 days, if we take all the transactions from all the users and all the response times added together, 48% of that time was this page. And that doesn't mean it was the slowest thing, and it doesn't mean it was the thing that got hit the most. It was both slow and hit the most. Does that make sense? So if you improve the performance of this, then maybe it'll go down on the list. It might not be able to go much further down because it's probably hit quite a bit. But the idea is we're already sorting it for you in an order to help you understand, work on this top thing first. You might have noticed when I switched it to the 3 days that these lines popped up here. These are actually deployment markers, so I get an indication that a deployment took place. So if the performance was changing drastically, that might be an indication for me to go in and drill in and take a look at what happened. And those deployment markers are super simple. It's just send a post command to New Relic. You add it into your Puppet or Chef script or whatever is doing your deployment, and then it'll show up in New Relic. And usually what you do with these transactions is you want to try to understand, what's this transaction composed of? What's it doing? I probably need to, might need to drop it down to less than 3 days at a time. So down here I have a table that's showing me where all the time is being spent in that transaction. Okay, so again, the goal here, if you think about all those kind of meetings you've been in, where you say, hey, my code's fine, and operations says, hey, the servers are running great, and this kind of thing. Here's where we know where the time is being spent. Okay, it's measured by something that's independent, and it comes in and will tell you, here's how much time is in your PHP code, time spent pulling data from Memcache, and time in the database queries. So in our case, tuning the database wouldn't buy us a whole lot because these other guys are adding up to a lot more of the response time of the system. So another common thing that I see here, this is a little hard to read, but where it says the Memcache here, it's actually hitting Memcache 115 times on average for one page transaction. And it's up to you to decide when that's too many times, but usually when you're leaving your code and going and calling something else, you're paying a cost for doing that. You do that too many times and your system's going to run super slow. So you want to understand not just the overall response time, but how many times are you going and doing that type of thing. So I mentioned the deployments. I'll show you what the deployments list looks like. You get a list of the deployments and on this screen, a high-level summary of how the system was doing after the deployment, and then you can drill in and you'll actually get a graph that'll show you what was the response time and load before and after. What did the CPU and memory look like? Was there a significant change in the database queries? And usually there's a bad version of this and a good version. The bad version where things start going haywire after the deployment. And actually we have a lot of kind of these where we've done a deployment, and we had one where the database just went and flatlined because they had figured out a new way to query the database that was a lot faster. And so, it can also be in a positive way to say, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We deployed the new code, and we can see right away that it worked the way that we expected. You actually, this change log is very short. I don't know what prettify clamshells means, but that's what went into the release notes in GitHub. So he's prettifying the clamshells, and now thankfully he's done his new deployment. And they're prettier, so that's good. I guess they were, yeah, or they're pretty like they used to be. And then we can actually generate a whole report that'll show you, here's all the top transactions out of your environment, and here's the before and after, okay? So this is all part of that M measurement and having the data to understand what do you want to do in your next sprint and your next release. You've got real information backing that up to tell you what's important. Now, at the beginning, you asked that question. Hey, if the back end is responding in 200 milliseconds, on average, and the front end is 3 or 4 seconds, what's making up that difference? So, you want to have some visibility into the end user experience. Okay, so in our case, we've got a JavaScript agent that gets pushed out that is just running in people's browsers. It's actually, if you're familiar with Google Analytics, it's very similar to how Google Analytics works, except we're kind of collecting performance data. The modern browsers let you tap in and say, tell me what was the response time of loading the page and when JavaScript events fired and that kind of thing. So what we were looking at on the earlier screen is everything contained in that purple bar that I just made it disappear. So you can see, even if we made the back-end system respond in 0 milliseconds, this would still be the response time of the application. It might be a little hard to read these, but this is because of time in the network. This is another thing I hear people all the time say, well, I have a network issue. I know I have a network issue. You don't know you have a network issue until you measure it from the customer's browser, okay? Because you could have a slow connection, but you could be doing a good job taking advantage of CDNs or a poor job taking advantage of CDNs or whatever. The DOM processing is where the browser is downloading things like JavaScript, style sheets, and third-party trackers and libraries you've added to your site. And then the page rendering is that initial set of running JavaScripts until the DOM is complete. Okay, so gaps in these guys can help you understand, where is that time being spent, just generally speaking. Another important thing you get from that browser end user monitoring is an understanding of your browser mix. So on our documentation site, most users are on Chrome or Firefox, or at least in the last hour. This becomes important information back to development and test teams when they're trying to do testing against a variety of browsers and versions and that type of thing. Well, you know exactly what's hitting you in production. Okay, because I see a lot of people who say, well, we don't support this, but people are still using that when they're hitting your site. You can't, you really can't control the browsers as much anymore. Actually, the other thing that you'll see a lot of times is the mobile browsers will pop up in here. So our site's not big for mobile browsing, but we still do get mobile Safari, mobile Chrome, and mobile Opera, at least in the last hour. And then when you go into these guys, you actually will see the versions that are hitting you. Okay, and so you can see most people are on Chrome 43, which is the latest, I guess. No, I guess someone's on 44. What's the latest?
45 is in there too.
Yeah.
45 is in there?
I think 46 is what beta is right now.
Wow. So this becomes a big challenge, right? So you're trying to understand. So I'll give an example, right? We had we had a ticket come in. Someone said, hey, some of your graphs don't display correctly in IE9. And we went and ran a report, and it actually showed we had a bunch of IE9 users. And our guys said, well, that's an old browser, but we need to figure out how to add it, how to fix it for those. Well, I mentioned during my presentation about the analytics piece. We actually added to that, viewing it from the perspective of what type of customers. We have a free tier and then different paid tiers. We actually found most of those IE9 users were on our free tier. So when we looked at it again, it was an issue. It would help a lot of people, but we wouldn't see any revenue from it. So we decided to kind of push that one down the list. So that's having the data to back those up and knowing what's happening in your production environment is important for product management and development kind of decisions.
And that's interesting. I wonder why IE9 is prevalent in the free tier. That's another question you can find. That's interesting. I think it's cheapskates and they're all the way around.
It's India.
India? It could.
They use a lot of Microsoft over there.
Maybe it could be offshore. It could be enterprise companies. Sometimes it's hard for enterprise companies to buy SaaS, so they just use it for free.
We're all the way up to 10. So
Unum's on 10, so it wasn't you guys. But again, having the background and knowledge, helps. So now that browser level, when we looked at those bars, the yellow bar and the blue bar, we really don't have a lot of information about what's behind that, okay? Because I said, hey, you're downloading style sheets and images and icons and other static content. This is a place where the synthetics comes in and is a big help. So, oh my gosh, someone turned off my synthetic. Okay. So we'll look at a synthetic for another popular site called Google. I'll have to go and take a look at what somebody did here. So synthetics are good because they're hitting your site. This one's actually been running for several days. So they're hitting your site with a well-known browser from a well-known location, on a consistent, regular basis. And they'll actually tell you if your site is changing. Google actually does change their homepage a lot, but a lot of times you expect your load size to be kind of flat and not change around a lot. And we can come in here and see a waterfall that's showing us, and Google is going to be one that's not a great example because they are very tight with what's on their homepage. They put the minimum amount on their homepage, but we can see a couple of redirects. We were directed from Google to www Google, and then it redirected us again for some reason, but we finally got the page returned pretty quickly, 153 milliseconds. And then we can see the other static content here, so like the Google logo, navigation icons, and the slowest guy here is this piece of JavaScript from gstatic.com. So we actually have quite a bit of detail that we're gathering about these guys from our synthetics. Having these synthetics that are running on a regular, consistent basis does help you get visibility in what's happening in those yellow and blue areas to try to understand. This is a very short waterfall. You'll commonly have them go for pages and pages and have 50 plus elements, and then you wonder why your site's slow because your backend code responded instantly and said, please go download these 50 things. So that takes a long time for the browser to do.
Is the implementation of a synthetic, is it like a service running someplace on a regular interval, and you, of course, configured the service to do a particular thing?
Yeah, so the way that ours works, we have different types of synthetics. This one's what's called a simple browser, which means we launch a real browser, and we go to the URL that you decide from the location that you pick on the frequency that you choose. And so that's a pretty basic one. We actually have one that's even more basic than that. It's called a ping, and a ping doesn't launch a browser. It's only looking at the HTTP response code. The browser at least will download all the assets and time them for you. And then from there, you could go to like a scripted browser if you want to say, go to the home page, log in, run a search, click on something. That's a scripted browser.
Does it do any screen capture where it shows you what graph, what page actually looks like?
The scripted browser one does. This guy doesn't. The simple browser, this is what you get. You see the assets, but you don't see the page itself. You can see like what the picture looks like, but that's what you would use the scripted browser guy for. Often you would use that like if you're trying to complete an order or something like that, you want to see the screenshot of the final screen that looks correct. But you can add the validations into your script. So you can say, if I do a search and my correct item doesn't pop up, fail the check. And then you get an email in the middle of the night and it says search is broken. So then you know before, before your boss calls you, I guess. You know it in the middle of the night, but yeah, that's kind of the use case around those scripted browsers. So this one is just a simple browser, though. It's just hitting this page over and over. But having this information is important because, again, you can try to make decisions about it. Hey, do we have too many JavaScripts? Do we need all the scripts that are being loaded? Are we using minified resources? Are these images large? The other thing is you can sort them by size. Again, Google's going to be, do a good job here. Actually, their biggest thing that they send you is a JavaScript, of course. The images that they send are actually small. Almost every site you go to, that's the reverse. The images are the big things, and the text that they send you is small. That's actually a really big JavaScript, 300. I'm going to have to look up what this is. But that's Google. They're tracking everything that you do, so it takes a lot of JavaScript to do that. So the last part that I want to touch on is the software analytics component. I briefly mentioned it where I told the story about tracking free versus paid users and that kind of thing. So whereas the APM type of products and the browser products are showing you an aggregate view of what's going on, under the hood, you may want to understand what's happening with each individual transaction, and you might want to actually pull them out and say, hey, I really care about these particular types of transactions. So that's where analytics comes in. So for example, this is a basic dashboard. I'm just going to try to make it a little bit bigger here, where you might want to summarize, hey, on one page, I want to look at the same data just from a few different perspectives. What states are people coming to the site from? What countries are they coming from? Or, what are the most popular pages? Like the home page is, of course, really popular, but what's the next most popular? Is something about getting started with the PHP agent, I guess. What browsers are people using and that kind of thing. So you can put all this stuff on the same page so you don't have to click around all over the place to find this kind of information. But there's actually more that you can do with this. So we've actually started putting feedback onto our documentation site. This is kind of interesting. This is pretty new. We actually put a little bar at the top of our documentation site. Is this did this help answer your question? And we're actually not doing that well. 108 people said the document, answered their question, but 85 people said no. I think our documentation is pretty good, but maybe you have to search around a little bit. So we can actually see, how many people are responding. We put that at the top and the bottom of each page on our documentation site, and so we can see it's actually split. We should need to leave them in both places because it's not like people are only going in one place or the other. And then which are the ones that people give us the most responses. So interestingly, this is our NRU, New Relic University, where we have videos, and people like the videos because they're more likely to give us a good rating on the videos page. Or what is Apdex? I didn't mention it earlier, but Apdex is a way to kind of group a big group of transactions together to try to understand is the application doing good or not. But I guess people like that page also. So people hate this one. But this is interesting because this is data that we're collecting from inside our app already. We're in there, and we notice what buttons people are clicking on, so we can just record that and build a dashboard right out of it. So this is probably an atypical use case. I was looking for, I know there's, this is the one. We can see what are the, what are the days when people are doing the most editing on our, on our system. How many pages are edited? Or I thought there was another one that had the titles. So I'll just show you, there's also a query language for this. So if I just want to figure out what's the most popular title of a page that people are hitting, this has a kind of a SQL-like type of syntax. So select count from transaction, and then a facet is kind of like a grouping clause, or break it down by the title since 1 week ago. So this will tell me what's the home page is is the most popular title, then documentation page, then synthetics overview, blah, 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 down the list. So this is an example of a custom attribute that we pumped into Insights, because by default it's only grabbing like things like URLs, but now I can actually see the title, which may make it easier for me to talk to my editors about what it is, because they don't care about the URLs that are used, they write the articles and their names, right? So again, you can actually add more and more clauses in here and say, I want to see what people who are running Chrome, what are their popular pages, and on and on and on and on. But the point is, when you have the data, that helps you when you got to go feedback and talk to the other teams and understand what do you want to go into next. So that was, I just kind of touched the surface on a couple of different areas of New Relic, but that was a pretty quick overview. I didn't want to drill into other areas unless I got some questions.
So back to the other page, and then had the different services, APM, et cetera, et cetera. So what is so you mentioned that there's a JavaScript agent for the browser. What about APM and like servers? Is there an agent? How is that instrumented? And then you mentioned too, you have an API that folks can leverage.
So for APM, we support 6 languages, Java, .NET, Ruby, Python, C, PHP, and Node.js. And these are all agent-based, okay, and they're language agents. So they're all different, they're unique, based on the language. And primarily, like in Java and .NET, it's an agent that's running inside the code. PHP, it actually runs outside of the code. I don't know about Python, but so if you look at your list of processes, you won't necessarily see a new process. But you're running a Tomcat container, and the agent is embedded. It's inside the Tomcat container. This account, I don't think I have any servers loaded on it, but the server monitor is a real lightweight CPU, memory, disk, and network monitor. It also gets you a process list. And the design pattern for this is, if you're going to cloud and using a bunch of virtual machines, you can just bake it into your template. And as soon as the image spins up, it'll start reporting to New Relic. And you can put default alert thresholds on there. So the new thing spins up, and then it runs out of disk space. 3 days later, you would get an alert, even though you never set anything up. It was all kind of done by convention.
What about databases?
That's the plugins. So, well, there's 2 things. One is the APM is going to measure database queries from the code. Okay, so it'll tell you. Let me show you.
The code where that query is?
What are the top queries that are used?
From the perspective of your app, so if you've got a network problem between your database server and your app, we'll tell you about that too.
That is pretty cool.
So we know that URL alias is the most common call that's made from the documentation site to our database. Okay. Remember when we were looking at the transaction trace earlier, the transaction traces would also tell us how many times that call happens, because it either could be something that's slow, or it could be something that's called a lot. Okay, but sometimes you want just the health of the database server, and that's what our plugins are for. So the way that our stuff works, if you license APM, you get the servers and the plugins for free. And this is a big community, kind of component where we've got some of these we've developed ourselves, but we've got hundreds of community contributed plugins, and some of them are contributed by the company that, That's their component. That's their system. So you can monitor your MySQL or SQL Server or Oracle or MongoDB or whatever. But again, it's the health of that server. Other questions or comments or mobile? This, I don't have it in this guy. I can pull one up here. I can pull one up here that is in our staging environment. So I mentioned that we have our own mobile app. We use our staging environment to monitor our production environment, because if production goes down, then the monitor would go down, right? So anyway, so so it's kind of weird when you think about it. But so this is actually an overview of our mobile APM monitoring. This is for native mobile apps. For example, this is our iOS app, and so we can see a very similar look and feel. This is the response time measured on the device from user interactions. If there's crashes occurring, a lot of people think of crash reporting as something you want to do. So we've got a built-in crash reporting. A lot of people would use 2 different SDKs. We can do it all with one SDK, which is nice. This is probably, I think, one of the bigger areas is measuring the HTTP calls that are leaving the mobile device, timing them, and giving you a list of them, so you know where you're spending time. And then the traffic, as just like the throughput type of metric, you have a traffic, but it's by your app version, because you want to know, are people downloading and using your newest version or not. This is probably, like I said, the most common one where I see people wanting to drill in is, what are the APIs that I rely upon? Now, our app relies upon api.newrelic.com, of course. And I can actually see a list of the slowest transactions here. And I just randomly picked one, but okay, it's up on the screen. I can see, for example, this is the SAML login. This for people who are doing single sign-on type of logins. But I can actually click this app server drill down, and that will take me from, right now this is as it's measured from the mobile experience, and then if I click that, it'll take me to the back-end service that supports it. So those two can collaborate, and you can kind of try to tie those together. Which reminds me of something I completely forgot to mention earlier. Any of these graphs that you see when you notice something interesting, you can come in and there's a plus button in the corner, and you can add a note. And you can say, hey, I noticed this type of thing, and you can actually then take that note and open a ticket. So if you're on the operation side, you notice something and the developers use tickets on how they work, they would receive a ticket, but it would show them exactly the graph you were looking at and exactly the context, time range, the app, and everything that you were looking at. If tickets are too slow and you're on the chat with somebody right now, and you're chatting with them, every screen in the bottom corner has a permalink, and the permalink will take you back to this exact screen, this exact time window. Okay, so those are kind of similar features, but I feel like the permalink is more for like, I'm talking to you right now, I'm on the phone, and I'm just going to send you the link. And the note is more like, put it in your work queue, and you get to it when you get to it. But this becomes important when you think about, different teams are all interested in looking at this data. It's all web-based. Everyone can see it, and you're all singing from the same sheet of music. Was there anything else that you want to see around mobile monitoring, or just the overview, or?
Yeah, not specifically, no.
Probably the one other thing that people ask about usually is the crashes. So, and I think our iOS may not be a good example. So we show you the crashes that are happening. Our iOS doesn't crash as much. The Android one, I'm an Android user. I know the Android one crashes more frequently. But your crash list is sorted by how many users were affected. Also, when you resolve the crash, okay, so you fixed the crash in version 5.1 and you pushed it out to the App Store, but your users don't have to download 5.1. They could stay on the old 5.0 and keep crashing. So we still notice when they crash. But you don't want to get upset about it because you've already fixed it. So those show up. I mean, you can get upset about it. It's your choice, I guess. But those show up under the resolved crashes. So we didn't forget about them, but there's no point in getting alerted about them because you've done as much as you can to fix it. And then these guys, basically this, I probably picked a bad example here. Well, no. So these guys give you actually a stack trace that will tell you, where you were in your code when the crash occurred. The errors on APM works the same way. JavaScript errors on the browser works the same way. It'll show you a stack trace and tell you where you are in your code. In the case of mobile, we actually also are able to see other threads. You can hit see all threads and see what was happening running in the other threads as well. So, but this looks like to me maybe a resolved one. I don't know. Oh, the other thing that you see right here, this is called kind of breadcrumbs, where you see what did the user do before they crashed. So, someone came in here, they logged in, they were going to the user's view, and then the application view, and then they crashed. So you get those for each of their crashes, so you can understand, maybe if it's a particular sequence of events that they're taking. And then, like you would expect, is this affecting only a certain version or whatever? That would easily be highlighted. That's not the case here. It's equally affecting iPhone, 5S and 6, and different, 8.3 and 8.1. So it's not for a particular version. So.
So you mentioned the free tier. We want to just play with this and explain how that works.
We offer, well.
And you can talk about all the tiers, but I was specifically curious about what all we could do with the free tier so we could just kind of play.
Yeah. So you can come to, newrelic.com, okay, and hit sign up, and you can create a new account. It's all web-based, so it'll send you an email just like you're used to normal services, and you got one more password you got to remember, and you get an account, and your account will look it'll look kind of like this guy, except it'll be empty. It'll say time to get started. As soon as you install an agent, you get a 14-day trial. But when the trial ends, your account will stay alive. Just the data will only be kept for 1 day. So you can use that. We've got a lot of people who are on those free trials. Because you have to put your email address in, someone from sales will contact you. But that's.
Which is how I got hooked up to you.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So anyway, if you're not going to buy it, just say, I'm just checking it out. I'm not going to buy anything. So that free tier is there, and there's a free version of each of the APM and the browser and the synthetics. We don't have a free version of the insights, so that's the one you have to license. You have to at least license the APM, and then we give you like 1 day of data. But that insights analytics, usually people license it separately. And it's SaaS based. You can see our pricing on our website. It's it starts for pretty cheap. $149 a host for the APM. Yeah, pricing.
Is that an annual price?
$149 a month for the APM. But you can use the free and you just only have 1 day of data retention. So depending upon what your app is, if you have like a little WordPress site and you just want to get alerted if the thing is going haywire, you can just use the free. We have a lot of people using this on little PHP sites and stuff like that. And as a matter of fact, it's good for business for us. People use us on their projects on the side, and then when something comes up at work, they call us and say, I'm already familiar with New Relic, so but we need the proper version and we want support and all that stuff. So that happens to me all the time. So yeah, I don't think we have the prices for all our stuff online because for us as a company, we're transitioning from a single product APM only company to a multi-product company. So we haven't cleaned up all our pricing on all our products and that kind of thing. But there's a free tier, like I said, for everything except for Insights. And if you have a startup, we also have startup pricing too. If you need the pro version, you need the retention, there's a special pricing for startups. I actually am not here to do the selling. I'm kind of more, more interested in talking about the DevOps and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of curious. So historically, monitoring was the responsibility of IT operations, and production support and that kind of thing. And nowadays, developers are getting kind of more pulled into it. But I'm curious what you guys think. A lot of folks think when they think of DevOps, they think of automation and automating builds and that kind of thing. I don't think as many people think of monitoring, but I'm kind of curious what anyone here thinks.
Well, it's my experience as a system administrator that you have a problem, and once you solve all the problems, it's usually something development stuff that you got to fix. They've written new code, so they're hand in hand. What you're solving is great. It points out exactly where it's at. But then on the other hand, like he said, you could all of a sudden have a network problem too, and you're chasing around the code, and it's not the code that's the problem, it's the network. So,
Yeah.
They're really hand in hand.
Yeah, it's interesting because network engineering has been fairly resistant to the same kind of changes that system operations have gone through in the last few years. But it's starting to get there with more automation in the network stack.
Yeah, yeah. You mean like software-defined networking or just
Yeah, and even
more basic?
quasi software-defined networking and just automated configs based on app deployment. That's
Automated configs, yeah.
not really software-defined networking.
No, but it's similar. It's, hey, here's a release, go put this code out, yeah.
What would be the pattern for monitoring at some level of vendor application? Not something I'm writing myself where I can bake in the APIs and stuff, but being delivered to me, I want some of this stuff as a vendor application.
If you're hosting it and running it, you can still put these on there, and they'll give you visibility, and they'll still tell you a lot of the.
In that application I was telling you about at Starbucks, that one that's going to be Tomcat based.
Yeah.
So we could get the Java plugin or the Java API stuff and put it in Tomcat, and it'll work with that vendor app.
There's no code changes required to install these agents. So yes, you can monitor a third-party app with it.
So how does that look specifically for Tomcat? That's interesting. You just put it in the manifest that it's going to be included, or?
No, it's a JVM argument. So that's it. It goes in the Catalina.conf, I think.
Yeah.
You can pass in or the .sh or whatever, but you pass in a -Java agent flag, and you give it the name of our jar file. So the instructions are like right here. You come in and say, hey, how do I install the Java agent? And it'll tell you. And actually, our stuff is smart enough to know that if you install it, if you put our directory right under Tomcat, it'll notice it's Tomcat and update the correct file for you. if you like to move all your files around and stuff, then you do it the manual way. So there's manual instructions too. But yeah, it's pretty simple. You know, like Tomcat, JBoss, even WebLogic, WebSphere, if people are still running those, or Jetty or whatever. It's all those work basically the same way. It's happening at the Java layer. The other thing that I see that's happening, because you mentioned, you know, vendor apps, at least for us, you can have as many users who have access to the data as you want. So there's no reason why you can't give your vendor an account to view the data, read-only. So they say, we know it's not our code. We've written the world's best code, and we got 25 other customers, and it's running great. So log into my new Relic, and here's the data, and here's how it's running in my environment. You know, so you tell me, did I set it up wrong? Your consultants were here, right? So I actually am starting to see that. You know, kind of happening. We actually are, to be completely honest, we're seeing it on the other end. Small startups who do work for their customers install New Relic and prove it kind of at the end of their project and say, look, we've delivered a good project, it looks good and it runs well, we're done. And then they leave, and sometimes those become leads for us. But yeah, so there's no reason why you can't also collaborate outside of your own company.
And don't let me talk about the questions, and you guys just jump in. So for a big paranoid corporation that some people may work for, so talking about the enterprise, you know, can you get something that's totally on-prem where it doesn't have to send the metrics outside the firewall to a New Relic server?
No, we believe in that SaaS is the best way to deliver this kind of software. So I actually used to work for a company that offered on-prem APM, and the challenges we were always faced were all the bugs are fixed, all the stuff you've complained about it's already been resolved, and my customer wouldn't install it, you know, because of their slow processes. So the only part that you've got to run on your side is the agent, and then we're doing all the rest of the work. And if you also think about like the browser component, that's lots of browsers that are hitting us, like a lot of browsers, because you know, we're on some very large sites, and all those browsers are constantly sending us their traffic. So we've scaled up our infrastructure to handle, you know, this enormous amount of data flowing in. That's another reason where if you wanted to build that out, it would become expensive and big for you. But because we've spread it across a lot of customers, it's cheaper. And then we normally will talk to the security teams. And I mean, I got through a security team at a major telco who's pretty serious about this kind of thing. You know, one of our big case studies is healthcare.gov. They used us after all their stuff crashed. And if you watch any of their like YouTube videos and stuff they talk about, one of the first things that they did, it was kind of a big DevOps kind of project. One of the first things they did was to install a monitor. You know, first have regular daily stand-up meetings to know what's going on, and then second install a monitor, and someone tell me what did the monitor say? Because they said their first monitor was CNN, right, to tell them when the site was working or not working. So. So healthcare.gov runs us. We're HIPAA compliant. We're PCI compliant. It's metric data. It's not sensitive customer data.
CIOs, they get concerned about server names. You know, they want their server names out there. They don't want to give anybody leverage.
Yep.
You know, on the inside.
Yep. That's part of life. Yep.
I know.
So. No, I mean, so yeah. That's for them to decide. Yep.
Yeah, but hey, they'll get into that. It's worth it. And it's cool stuff there.
Yeah, it's inexpensive too, you know, and for the value that you get out of it, and it can help you find these issues and that kind of thing. You know, frankly, yeah. And we take security very seriously. So, you know, we're what's called SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, which means we're constantly being audited for our processes and procedures, access to data, access to New Relic, the data transmission into New Relic, the SSL certificates and all that stuff. So it's a pretty nice security story that we have when we talk to these teams.
So I saw lots of slick dashboards to show the data. Is there some way I can just get the data involved and do some of my own analytics?
Yeah. So we have an API. I'll pull up the documentation site where it's going to ask me if I like the documentation. Yeah, see, was the document helpful? I had never clicked any of those buttons. Now I need to click them so that our score goes up. But we have an API. I'm just joking, yeah. I don't work on the documentation team. I actually I use the documentation like every day, but I use it for my demo. So we have an API that you can come and query and pull the data out. And it's a pretty nice API. All that same metrics and data that I showed you, servers and browser and APM, it's all there and available to pull out. And so you could do your own analysis. Although I had a customer, he said, hey, he was trying to do an analysis. People come to the home screen, and then we know they go to this second most common page, and then we're trying to figure out, when they run a report, because we're trying to redesign that part of our flow, and often you would use a funnel to analyze that, and we actually have a funnel feature in New Relic. So I said, you guys may not realize we have the funnel feature, and I ran the funnel, and the guy said, I've been trying to scrape logs and export data and put it in Excel, and our funnel actually answered it for him, and he didn't have to analyze it outside of New Relic. But I know sometimes you do, so you have the API to pull the data out.
Do you guys have any plugins for Google AdWords, any kind of advertising stuff?
We don't have, we're not in that part of the Google Analytics world, like what's the hit rate of your ads and things like that?
No, just basically if your sites are down, to pause all your advertising, or if your sites are too slow. So if you spend a tremendous amount of money advertising.
I don't know
Is there an alerts API?
Yes.
So you can script it.
Yeah, there's alerts. You can get alerts when I didn't show it up here.
Do they do arbitrary posts or? Yeah,
we have a webhook notification channel, so we can just make a post on an alert that you set up, and it'll post like a JSON message. I'm not familiar with the Google AdWords stuff, so maybe you guys already just figured it out, but yeah, so alerts is pretty basic. You set up like thresholds. When it crosses the threshold for 5 minutes or something, then send an alert, and they can be email or HipChat or webhook, as an example.
So totally getting my corporate hat on here. What about training? Do you have a training arm in the company?
Not really. We're not kind of big on big professional services and training. So I
saw videos.
Yeah, I mentioned that literally the NRU, the New Relic University, the one that everybody liked on from our analytics. We start people here. We do lunch and learns. I do office hours oftentimes with my new customers as they're getting familiar with the product. We'll spend an enormous amount on our design to make sure that the product's really easy to use and good documentation. But you're not going to see us march in a bunch of consultants and that kind of thing.
Professional services.
We have
It's kind of refreshing that the business model isn't we're going to get you hooked and then sell you everything else in the world, so it's time to work.
We've got a couple guys, because sometimes people really want to tweak the agents and that kind of thing. But that's it. That's not really our model.
And for the paid tiers, is there a support in there of some sort?
Yeah.
So 800 number or a ticketing system?
Yeah. We use Zendesk, so you open tickets or email. I usually do it over email and that kind of thing. And then if regular support cycle, collect logs, this is the issue and that kind of thing. And it's cool because it's SaaS. We can access your account if you let us, and we'd take a look at the data and that kind of thing. So that makes things fast. The other thing is we are monitoring like over 3 million applications, and so we've actually seen a big variety of different things, and that's always helpful too. When you have a certain issue, say, oh, okay, that's a known one. We've seen that before. So
there was a screen where you said you can use synthetic injections from all over the world. Is that sort of representative of where your data centers or your practices are?
Those are just a few locations. We just kind of launched the synthetics about 6 months ago or 7 months ago. And these are our initial locations, just a couple in the US. We'll probably add more over time, but I mentioned it. A lot of people tried to solve the problem of what's my end user experience by using synthetics. And so they'd say, I want synthetics everywhere where my users are. Well, we should use the browser monitoring and monitor what the user's experience really is directly. And we shouldn't try to replicate all their locations, is what I'm saying. And that becomes really expensive. So you'll find we don't have that many locations, and we're going to push you towards use the browser monitoring and get that working instead.
It's a test where you don't have customers either.
Yeah.
So what about collection points? You know, like for instance, we have users in the UK, or we have, you know.
Yeah.
So if we've got it running there, is the agent smart enough to push the data to a close collection point?
So these are actually running in Amazon. So
Okay. I knew much about Amazon. I realized what was going on there.
So this will actually spin up in a local IP address, and if your system recognizes it and sends it to the certain location, that's the one thing we're missing. We need a few more locations if you're really like location specific. So I had a customer, we're missing like central U.S. We don't have one, and that's a kind of a common thing. But like especially because Chicago, there's a lot of data centers in Chicago. But we're going to have pretty quick here what we call private, I don't know what they're going to call it, private agents or private something, where you can run one of these guys yourself and you can just put it in your data center. And I'm not sure what it'll look like yet, but we're going to go in the beta and that pretty soon here. And that'll also help so you can control where you want something to be run from. Other questions? Comments? Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you guys, having me up here in Chattanooga. And I mentioned to Richard, my family and I are actually coming to Chattanooga this weekend. So it's kind of funny for, just for a little weekend vacation trip and use some hotel points, and we're staying somewhere in the area. So it's just kind of funny to be here, a few days before, scouting it out and seeing where we're going to take all the kids. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.